agriculture is where I want to go next. And that's why it's so important that the work that my students want to do with you is to start collecting the histories of Black farmers in the Central Valley so that we can build upon that on the 22-acre farm. So the history of agriculture. Agriculture started 10,000 years ago in what is now known as the Middle East, but was used to be called Mesopotamia, and that's people sort of discovered it by accident, that they would spill some seeds and they noticed that there was this collection of wheat, and so they learned how to cultivate that way by accident. The same thing happened with corn in the Americas. So there are these two really incredible evolutions of agriculture happening on both sides of the world. People were eating these wild foods and then learned that they could control the quality of them by selecting seeds from the bigger chunks of corn. But now, as many of you realized when you went to that march, our agriculture system is in jeopardy. We're facing a lot of challenges like the drought and access to land and pressure to use pesticides and other chemicals and poisons to grow more food, to feed more people, but at what cost? At what human cost does all of that come? How many of you can name crops, food crops, that originated from the African continent? Because that became one of the hubs of agriculture historically. Yam, sweet potato, that's one. Black-eyed peas.
Greens?
Yes, certain kinds of greens that used to be weeds, but then were cultivated. Some of it is grown to feed cows here. We don't eat it the way people in Africa eat it. Sorghum. You ever seen a field of sorghum? You might not even recognize it, but it's here. It's here in the valley, but it's totally disconnected from our diets because it's all grown to feed the cows and to feed them in these massive plants. They don't get to run around and be cows. Who likes their coffee? Coffee originated in Ethiopia. There's also an Ethiopian community in Fresno. And then coffee was distributed through the processes of colonization and grown mainly for elite purposes, and then it became a drink to kind of keep working people working harder. And that's sort of how it works now. People get the big sugary Starbucks because you gotta get through the grind, you know. But that's not the best way to take your coffee, unfortunately, but sometimes we have to do what we do to get through the day. Watermelon, rice. Rice is also grown in California, but the history of it in the United States is that slave owners in the Carolinas actively sought Sierra Leone's slaves who had knowledge of rice agriculture and paid more for those individuals to come to the colonies and grow rice, and they capitalized on that knowledge and obviously did not compensate those people anything for it, but that is what made the rice economy in the South in only colonial times. But it's all but erased because how we grow rice today is so mechanized. There's almost no people involved other than those who are planting the crops. Okra, and I'm really excited to get okra in my CSA box, my community supported agriculture box, and that's a model of farming where you grow certain things and fill orders for people who order a box every week of food and get diverse foods. And I'm excited to see how people react to okra because it's not commonly consumed in the demographic of people that participates in that kind of subscription. But a neat thing about it is it's cheaper to get a weekly box of organic vegetables grown in your backyard than it is to go buy them in the grocery store. And so we need to figure out ways, we were talking this morning, figure out ways about how to make that kind of system work in West Fresno so that people can have better access to those things, but also to have things that are culturally familiar, like okra and collard greens. And I'm excited for you guys to experiment with growing those things, and hopefully to learn more about their history and biology through my students who are going to try to build a library for you.
Amen.
Watermelon is another interesting one, and millet, which is also very drought tolerant and is native to the African continent. And unfortunately, colonizers in Africa have tried to replace a lot of these crops that do really well in certain environments with things that don't do as well, like corn and wheat, because they were deemed as being more civilized. And another thing about them is that the processing, they altered the processing of them to make those products literally more white. So beating corn until it's a mush and not very nutritious, and letting it bake in the sun takes all the vitamins out of it instead of eating it as a whole food. But that was the custom, and now we know better. So how can we reclaim some of those practices that were very nutritious, that are indigenous to your roots, and take advantage of them now before they're lost. I also comment on, so the agriculture on the African continent is a lot different than it was historically, not only through colonialism of the past, but colonialism of the present. And that group, that company that you were marching against, Monsanto, has invested its interests in Africa to change how agriculture is practiced. And so there's this thing called the New Green Revolution, and they want to start creating more of a plantation system in several African countries like Kenya and South Africa. It's already happening there, where it'll look more like the Central Valley than it did the traditional small-scale subsistence farms of the past. And so they're creating a new economy, and there are actually farm workers that are paid very low wages to work on those farms that ship roses and tulips to European markets, and that ship us oranges and wine from South Africa. There's people behind those products that we buy in the store. And it's a lot of people, in the conversations about farm work in the United States, which is my area of focus, call it the new slavery. Even though you're paid a wage, it's so little that it's barely enough to survive on. And so we have to figure out new ways to, not necessarily new ways, but to bring back some of the old ways that worked better in terms of supporting ourselves, but also to create new ways of interacting with each other and trading with each other that are more equitable and just, and that preserve our health and our environment. And I think that the work that you're doing fits into that really well. And I'm excited to see you all grow and to see it grow, and to have you in my classes very soon. Before you know it, you're going to be walking the graduation lines. I want to invite my two students who came to visit today too. Lemuel Wheatley and Brianna Ames are both anthropology students at Fresno State. And I hope that through interacting with them, you'll learn more about what their experiences have been and how they're making it work and thriving at the university. And you should feel free to chat with them and me if you need anything. In Spanish, they say a servirles, and that means I'm here to serve. I'm at your orders. So let me know if you need anything, and I'm really excited to be working on this project with you all.
Amen.
Amen.
Oh yeah, sure.
With the food processing right now, say like with the chickens.
Oh yeah.
How they're shooting them in with hormones. How is that affecting our children and all the way up to adults?
Well, there's different policies for different meat. So